Hello, America. I'm Judge Andrew Napolitano in for Glenn Beck tonight. First up, the debt, the president, and you. Today we found out that the president claims that the debt does matter. Now, for most of President Obama's tenure, he subscribed to a bogus economic philosophy that argues that government spending spurs the economy and that the government can borrow as much money as it wants in order to carry out this absurd idea. Thus, he supported initiatives like the stimulus packages, which borrowed and flushed $1 trillion down the drain. Because this economic philosophy, government borrowing and spending its way to prosperity, does not account for political influence. And as we all know, when money is being spent and politicians are the ones spending it, it's going to be wasted on their pet projects that don't help the economy grow, but just ensure the re-election of the politicians who do the spending. But today, the president has finally realized that the debt does matter. But is he willing to spend less? No, of course not. He's willing to tax the folks who create the jobs and thereby slow the rate of economic growth. After all, under President Obama, the debt has exploded to the tune of $1 trillion a year. Joining me now on the president's debt dance, South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Welcome back to the Glenn Beck program, Senator. It's good to see you.
Judge, how you doing? I miss you.
Thank you. Same here. Senator, I think we just witnessed the kickoff to the president's re-election campaign. What do you think?
I think he's getting religion because of the way the wind is blowing. I like the president personally, but his budget a couple of years ago or a couple of months ago did nothing on spending and entitlements. This is an effort to change his positioning, but it's a swing and a miss. He did this because of the pressure the public's putting on all of us up here to get serious about America's long-term indebtedness.
You know, I'm really confused by what he said, Senator. This is the same president who, as you know, just 4 months ago signed into law an extension of the Bush-era tax rates. This is the same president who, when he ran 2 years before that, said he would never sign a tax break for people that he says are rich. This is the same president who really has accumulated debt at a rate faster than any president in American history, suddenly says we have to worry about the debt, but all that spending on all those social programs restated. All you folks on the left that were upset with me 4 months ago, it's the old Barack Obama back again.
And the one thing he didn't do is touch where the debt really is, and that's the entitlement reform.
Right.
He did nothing about Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. That is 57% of government spending. Today, with Rand Paul and Mike Lee, I introduced a Social Security reform bill that gets to solvency at a 75-year from now. It will be fully solvent. We adjust the age to 70 slowly but surely over time, and we means test benefits, and we don't raise 1 penny of taxes. To anybody listening to this program, tax increases cost Americans jobs. There's no other way to say it.
2 days before our taxes are due. I don't know if he looked at the calendar, because until April 15th, he announces that he wants to raise taxes on the people that pay the most. Isn't this dead on arrival in the Congress today with 47 Republicans in the Senate and a majority of Republicans in the House? He knows this isn't going anywhere.
Well, have you ever been to a party with somebody that really didn't want to be there?
Yes.
The president really doesn't want to be here. He's talking about things that he doesn't really believe in, and that's reducing the size of government. But he did not produce, even today, a budget that deals with our long-term debt issues. You cannot get America out of bankruptcy until you reform Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid, and he did nothing about these entitlement programs. You can't get enough taxes from people making over $250,000 a year to begin to get us out of debt, and 40% of Americans don't pay any income tax, and the ones that are making over $250,000, 750,000 of them are small business people who create the jobs for our economy.
Right.
It's a job killer.
Senator Graham, tell me where you think we're going to go in the long run, because in about 3 weeks, the president, and I think the Republican leadership may go along with him on this as long as they can get some concessions, will ask the Congress to amend the law to allow him to borrow more money. Now, he has borrowed more money at a faster rate, as you know, than any president in history. Today, as usual, he blamed it on his predecessors. But he's added $1 trillion a year. He wants to add another $1 trillion between now and October. He wants to add $1.7 trillion in the year following that. Is the Congress going to let him borrow at the rate at which he wants to? Are they going to let him borrow, period?
I hope that we will not raise the debt limit until we address why we're in debt. The debt limit being raised without fundamental reform is just a bad idea. It is feeding the system that exists today. What we ought to do is come up with entitlement reform before we raise the debt. Work together as Republicans and Democrats to do what Rand Paul and Mike Lee did along with me today. Show you can save Social Security from bankruptcy. You can wipe $5.4 trillion of unfunded debt off the table if you just adjust the age and means test benefits. I don't want to tax anybody, but in the future, at my income level, I would give up some future benefits for Social Security based on my income. Just don't raise my taxes because that hurts the ability to create jobs. I'm not going to vote for the debt ceiling increase until the Congress and the President assures me we're going to deal with why we got in debt.
All right. What is your opinion of Congressman Paul Ryan's proposals, which would cut far more than the President's in future years? And what will happen to those proposals when I think they are passed by the House later this week and end up on Harry Reid's desk somewhere?
I think Paul has come up with a very good plan. He did the hard things when it comes to entitlement. He didn't do a whole lot on Social Security, but when it comes over here, I imagine the demagoguery would start about his Medicare proposal. He takes Medicaid and he block grants it. He gives the money to governors to come up with programs to serve people. You know, in South Carolina, we have different health care issues than they do in California. So a block grant in Medicaid not only saves money, it helps people with a better quality of health care. Paul did that. So at the end of the day, Mike Lee, Rand Paul, and Lindsey Graham today showed the Congress and the nation how you can save Social Security from bankruptcy by continuing what Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did, adjust the age from 67 to 70. At 2032, the new retirement age would be 70. And that's a long time away. You can plan for it, and we means test benefits.
Thank you for looking at me when you said that's a long time away. Is there any room in your ideas about saving us money for meaningful cuts in the Defense Department's budget?
There's some ways to reform defense spending, but in terms of GDP spending, the amount of money we spend as a nation on defense, we're at a historic low since World War II. But here's how you save money on defense. When you build a new weapon system, it's a cost-plus contract. Guess what? The contractor could care less how long it takes to develop the weapon because they get paid. And at the end of the day, the more it costs to develop the weapon system, the more they get from the government. Why don't you replace that system with a fixed price? Tell contractors, if you want to build weapons for the United States, you got to put 25% of the cost in development up front. When it's completed, it's going to be a fixed price contract, and any overruns you're on the hook for if you cause them. That could save hundreds of billions of dollars just by changing the way you do business.
That's that military-industrial complex thing Eisenhower warned us about. Senator Graham, Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, it's a pleasure as always. Thanks for being with us.
Go get him, Judge. Thanks.
You got it. And the president continues the blame game, pointing the finger at the Republicans' budget plan, which he called, quote, listen to this, deeply pessimistic.
They want to give people like me a $200,000 tax cut that's paid for by asking 33 seniors each to pay $6,000 more in health costs. That's not right. And it's not going to happen as long as I'm president.
We're not sure if Vice President Joe Biden was listening, though. It kind of looks like he may have, look at him there, he may have dozed off. But I know someone who was listening to that speech today who did not doze off and has some strong opinions on it. Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, host of Huckabee here on Fox News, my colleague and friend, and the author of the New York Times bestseller, A Simple Government. Governor Huckabee, welcome here. Sorry to introduce you with that picture of Joe Biden sleeping, but that's really no surprise.
Well, he wasn't sleeping, Judge. He was praying. He was praying that nobody will find out just how disingenuous they are about actually cutting the expenses, and hoping and praying that the American people don't catch on to the games that they're trying to hoist upon us, because I don't believe for a minute that President Obama was ever serious about reducing spending until he was sort of brought into this kicking and screaming, because the Republicans have forced him to accept that people aren't going to continue to let the government spin them into oblivion.
You know, Governor Mike, I think you put your finger on on the perfect word, disingenuous. This is the same president who boasted about his negotiating skills last December when he begrudgingly signed into law an extension of the Bush-era tax rates. He praised the idea that more money in the pockets of hardworking Americans, entrepreneurial Americans who invest money will produce more jobs. Today he said the opposite. Do you think he heard something from his left-wing buddies out there who are getting a little disenchanted with him?
Well, the left is very unhappy with him. He's finding himself in a very difficult position. The base that has sort of brought him to the dance, which is the far left, they're mad at him over Libya. They're mad at him for the deal that he struck on the Bush tax cuts. They're mad that he actually ended up with a deal not only to reduce spending by $40 billion, which he didn't want to do, which was an $80 billion turn from the $40 billion additional monies he wanted to spend.
Right.
But then John Boehner got something else out of the deal. He got standalone votes on Planned Parenthood and NPR that the Congress has never been willing to give before. So there's some reasons that the left is unhappy with President Obama. The image that comes to mind, Judge, is that of trying to push a rope. A leader can grab something with a rope and pull. President Obama has shown really an inability to understand leadership is getting in front of something, not behind it. And again, the image that I have of him in all of this is pushing the rope, not pulling it.
You know, I wonder if he wasn't motivated by somebody like Paul Krugman, the Princeton professor and New York Times very, very liberal columnist, whose article on Monday, that's this past Monday, which followed the midnight deal Friday night, basically said, where's the president? He's not leading at all, because the left has been clamoring for his leadership. I think Senator Lindsey Graham agrees with me. I don't know if you heard the interview, that
Yes.
Today was the kickoff of the president's reelection campaign. He's trying to throw in a little bit of something for everybody, and the bottom line is that nobody will believe any of it.
Well, the Republicans certainly don't believe that he's serious about reducing the deficit and the debt by believing raising taxes is the way to go about it.
Right.
And I want to note something. When the president talks about raising taxes, notice there's a marriage penalty here, which is, to me, very counterproductive to building a strong economy. It's $200,000 for the individual. It's $250,000 for a couple or a family, which means also a small business. So you're, in essence, penalized $150,000 if you happen to be married. Or if you're a small business, there's that penalty that's subtle, but yet it's still there, and it should be absolutely unacceptable to the Republicans to accept that.
Don't you think the idea, Governor Huckabee, of raising taxes on anyone in a recession is dead on arrival? Dead on arrival because the Republicans control the House and tax legislation has to begin there, so it'll never even get to the floor. And dead on arrival because it just doesn't make economic sense. When you have bad times, the government should take less money from people, not more.
I think it's very much like the situation on our border. Nobody believes we ought to be talking about what to do for illegal immigrants who are here until we secure the border. I don't think most Americans believe we ought to be talking about that we're going to raise taxes unless we first show over a longitudinal time period some actual reductions in real spending. And I'm not talking a few billion.
Right.
I'm talking about the kind of serious maybe reformations of these entitlement programs. It doesn't have to mean that old people and women and children are going to die. We're not talking about ripping sandwiches out of a child's hand at school.
Right.
What we are talking about is making the programs efficient by giving them local leadership rather than believing that somebody sitting in Washington can figure out that one size will fit all in every one of the 50 states.
Governor, what would you do if you were president or if you were in the Congress now on this issue over raising the debt ceiling? In about 3 weeks, the government will be at that $14.3 trillion mark where it legally cannot borrow any more money. It hasn't the means or the intention of paying that back. And yet the president's going to go to the leaders of the House and the Senate and say, let me borrow a few trillion more. What would Mike Huckabee do? Would he authorize that borrowing? Would he put ironclad strings on it, not strings, chains? Or would he say, no, we got to stop the borrowing, we got to pay back the debt? The time to do that is now.
Well, I think that Speaker Boehner has got some real leverage here because in order to get the debt ceiling raised, he's got to get Congress to go along with it. And in order for that to happen, I think the Speaker, and he said he's going to do this, is going to ask and demand that there are some very specific, concrete, visible, transparent ways in which spending is going to be cut. If he doesn't get that, I think then he ought to follow President Obama's advice when he was a senator. Senator Obama, back in 2007, when he got up and talked about... Well, no, this is what is so amazing. Right. Obama has taken all sides of every position. In 2007, and there's a senator, he said voting to expand the debt ceiling would be a complete failure of leadership. Now he's had this bright light hit him on the road to Damascus, and he's seeing it all differently now. Well, you can't have it both ways. So maybe the Speaker will just take Senator Obama's position on that rather than President Obama's position on that.
All right. Can I ask you on air if you're going to run for president?
You can ask me, certainly. You just did.
I don't hear an answer.
I'm going to give you the same answer I'm giving everybody because it's the truth. I'm going to make a decision sometime by this summer, and I'll let you know. I promise.
Governor Mike, you'll come down to my office and let me know?
I'll let you know.
You got it.
Promise.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Judge.
Liberals up in arms over President Obama's move to the center may need to brace themselves. His next move could alienate the left even more. That's coming up. In today's speech, but there's one thing he made perfectly clear. If you're a wealthy American, raising your taxes can help pay for our spending problem.
The top 1% saw their income rise by an average of more than $250,000 each. That's who needs to pay less taxes? They want to give people like me a $200,000 tax cut. That's not right. It's not going to happen as long as I'm president.
Now, we'll see about that. Joining me now is Minnesota Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann. Congresswoman Bachmann, it's a pleasure. Welcome to the Glenn Beck program.
Well, good to see you, Judge.
What is the, likewise, what is the reaction of the members of the Congress in the Tea Party caucus to this lurch to the left by the same president who 4 months ago signed into law an extension of the Bush-era tax cuts and seemed happy when he did so?
Well, no one takes him seriously with what he's saying because it's just same old, same old. It's same song, second verse. The president is committed to class warfare. If you want to see this president irritated, angry, or sarcastic, watch what he says about people who he considers wealthy. That's people making $200,000 a year or more, or businesses. He has something against businesses. Maybe that's why we're not seeing private job creation. What you didn't hear out of President Obama is how we create more jobs in the private sector and how we create wealth. This is a good thing, but he's always attacking wealth creation.
Right. You know, I fully agree with you when you say no one can take him seriously, Congresswoman Bachmann, because back in December when he did sign into law the extension of the Bush-era tax rates, he almost sounded like Milton Friedman. He basically said, in bad times, the government should take less of your money so you have more of it to invest. The times are no better now than they were 4 months ago. Now he wants to take $1 trillion out of the economy, give it to government. Has he forgotten that private enterprise produces wealth? The government merely consumes wealth.
Well, that's exactly right. And President Obama, no president has ever come close to his level of deficits. In fact, President Obama's deficit this year will be 10 times that of George Bush in 2007, and George Bush was spending too much money. So if you take the first and second and now the third year with President Obama, his deficits in 3 years are $4.3 trillion. In his proposal today, Judge, he says he wants to cut back $4 trillion over 10 years. We'll just stop spending the money in the first place.
All right,
that's the answer.
What's going to happen in the next couple of weeks, Congresswoman Bachmann, when the president comes to the Congress and says, even though I've already borrowed $2 trillion, I got to borrow another trillion between now and October and $1.7 trillion the year after that. Will the House of Representatives, of which you are a prominent member, vote to raise the debt ceiling and let him borrow more money, or will they simply say no? The time to draw the line in the sand, Mr. President, is now. No more borrowing.
Well, that's my position. The answer is no. I think it's quite likely, though, that the answer will be yes. And the problem with raising the debt ceiling, as you know all too well, Judge, is this. This gives the United States Congress the power to continue to borrow more money.
Right.
We're already, every dollar the federal government spends, 41 cents of that dollar is borrowed money. So this just gives us authority to make a bad situation even worse. What would happen if we don't raise the debt ceiling is this. It would take 6 or 7 months before we'd really start to feel a difference. And it isn't that money would stop coming in.
Right.
Money would continue to come in. We just have to prioritize. So we'd pay our debts first. That's important. And then from there, we just couldn't pay for everything. Hey, maybe that's not such a bad idea. Just prioritize our spending.
Why don't more Republicans think like you? Why aren't there more Republicans in the House of Representatives who will just say no to the borrowing? Now is the time to stop. We can't afford it. It's immoral to borrow money when we don't have the means or the intention to pay it back.
Because the political establishment wants to keep this engine going without skipping a beat. I don't feel that way. I'm not a part of the political class or the political establishment. We can't keep this machine going. We shouldn't want to keep this machine going. What we should want is to have an efficient, functioning machine so that we can have a strong economy. I'm more interested in private job creation in the economy than I am about a bigger and bigger machine here in Washington, D.C. called the federal government.
Before I let you go, Congressman Paul Ryan has made a very, very dramatic proposal to cut radically from the president's budget. Some people think he could cut more, but it's bigger than anyone ever expected. Do you support that, and do you think the House will vote in favor of it at the end of this week?
I think the House will vote in favor. I'll be voting in favor. This bill for 2012, our budget bill that we will vote on, we will pass on Friday, is exactly the right direction, which is cutting spending and not allowing tax increases. That's a good formula for private job creation.
Yes, it is. Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. See you again soon.
Thank you. Okay, bye, Judge.
Bye-bye. Why Congressman Paul Ryan's plan to slash our federal debt is leaving some on the right squirming. Next. Republican Paul Ryan's budget proposal for 2012 would cut about $6 trillion from federal spending over the next 10 years. The House is supposed to vote on it this Friday. Of course, the Democrats hate it. But now, according to reports, some Republican lawmakers aren't fans of it either and are avoiding saying how they plan to vote. Congressman Ryan's cuts are too big for many mainstream Republicans and too small for many libertarians. So will the House pass it? Who better to ask than a Democrat? Kirsten Powers, the New York Post columnist, Fox News analyst, and my friend. Kirsten, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to the Glenn Beck program.
Great to be here.
What's your take on what the House will do? I mean, the leadership is in favor of this. Even some libertarian-leaning members of Congress, like Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, who was just on right before you, is in favor of it, though I didn't know that until a few moments ago. Do you think that Congressman Ryan's plan passes the House, even though there are misgivings all across the board amongst Republicans?
Yeah, I do. I haven't really heard that much in terms of an expectation that it wouldn't pass. There certainly, I'm sure, are some Republicans who are a little leery of it because there are such draconian cuts in it, and they might be afraid of some sort of blowback from their constituents. But you have to remember the Republicans are really, this is really directed at their base, and I think that they're very afraid of what will happen if they don't deliver on the promises that they made.
All right, just as the president obviously had his eye on his base this afternoon when he talked about raising taxes on the rich, is this something done for the base? Because I'm talking about Congressman Ryan's proposals, because even if it passes the House, isn't it dead on arrival in the Senate?
Yeah, totally dead on arrival. I mean, it would never, ever go anywhere in the Senate, and of course the president would veto it. So it's so far removed, really, from what anybody else is talking about, whether it's President Obama or the Gang of Six or the Simpson Bulls. It's just so far away that it's just going to go nowhere.
All right. When you say the Gang of Six, this is 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans in the Senate who are attempting to craft legislation along the lines of what the President's Debt Commission, you referred to it by its common name, Simpson Bowles, after the co-chairs of the commission. Is there a chance then, Kirsten, that some other proposal could be before the Congress? We have the president's, we have Rand Paul's, which cuts $500 billion a year. We have Congressman Ryan's. Is there going to be some sort of moderate compromise that will pop up and go to the House before it makes its way to the Senate?
Well, I mean, that certainly would be the hope, but if you listen to the Republicans, that they don't sound open to that at all. I mean, like I said, they have staked themselves so far out away from really anything that I consider reasonable. You know, I mean, I know a lot of people are lauding this as very, you know, Congressman Ryan's budget as being this very bold budget. I mean, it's bold in the sense that it's kind of out there, you know, but it's not really going to ever go anywhere. And I think what the president was doing today was really just reiterating what our social compact is in this country, and it's not to essentially get rid of Medicare and Medicaid, which is what that budget would do.
Did the president reiterate that today, Kirsten, because he perceived that he had a problem on his left flank after some of the compromises with which he's gone along in the past 4 months, like in December when he signed the Bush-era tax rates into law yet again, and last week when he went along with the midnight agreement to prevent the government from closing down, something that really aggravated his friends on the left come Monday morning.
Yeah. Well, look, the left has been upset with him for a long time. I don't know how many times that story can be written, actually. Every time the left is upset with Obama, it's like, oh, okay. They're actually very happy about the speech that he gave today. And I think that, you know, that I don't think that's only who he was trying to reach, however. What's interesting about Congressman Ryan's budget is that it's really the underlying ideas are quite unpopular with most Americans. Most Americans, believe it or not, never wanted the tax cuts for the rich extended even this last time, and they certainly don't want more tax cuts for the rich.
Is there still a divide amongst the Republicans in the House between the mainstream, what I like to call big government Republicans, and the small government libertarians, or will they come together on something, whether it's Congressman Ryan's proposal or something, so that they appear unified? Because if the Democrats pick off the libertarians, I don't think John Boehner has a majority.
Well, I mean, they seem pretty unified right now, you know, and they seem fairly unified around this budget. And I you know, there are some theories out there among Democrats that the Republicans don't really want a budget to pass. That if there is a budget that passes, it'll be good for Obama, and especially if it's a good budget. And so it could just be that they're perfectly happy just to kind of gum up the gears. You know, so that's an alternate theory.
Okay. Kirsten Powers, pleasure as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, the truth about inflation the Fed is not likely to tell you. Oil and food prices are surging, but the Federal Reserve is trying to tell us not to worry about inflation. The Fed's second highest ranking official, Vice Chair Janet Yellen, just said price increases of oil, grain, and other commodities are, quote, unlikely to have persistent effects on consumer inflation or to derail the economic recovery. What recovery? Should we pay any attention to the central bank that monetizes billions of our debt by printing cash? Let's ask syndicated radio talk show host and my friend Nancy Skinner and Mark Calabria, Director of Financial Regulation Studies at the Cato Institute. Mark, to you first. Does the Fed just so enjoy its position of dominance in our economic system that it will not look at things like gasoline, potatoes, corn, and beer going up almost right before our very eyes?
Well, I think the Fed is stuck in this framework where more inflation is going to get us more employment. They're stuck in this Keynesian Phillips curve framework that is simply broken and is simply false. So I think with their mindset, they don't want to acknowledge these things because they would admit that there are costs to the actions that they're pursuing. They're going to pursue this course regardless because they look at the unemployment numbers. That's all they look at, and they believe that the more money they pump out there, they'll be able to bring down the unemployment numbers. Now, since I think that's false, they're absolutely ignoring what are very real costs in the economy. All right,
Nancy, you are a woman of the people. You stand up for the little guys. I know this because we do this all the time on Freedom Watch. Isn't it really the middle class and even the poorer folks among us who get hurt the most by the Fed's money printing, inflation causing problems? You might be able to afford $4 a gallon for gasoline, but a lot of people will think twice about driving to work if it costs them that much to fill the tank.
Well, here's the thing, Judge, that your solution, even if I assume you to be correct, and I don't, because there's a difference between wage inflation and energy and commodities, as we've discussed many times.
We're talking about price inflation.
Because, you know what, wage inflation is what we really worry about, because that means there's enough pricing power that everyone, we're so employed, that workers can demand more wages, and so the price of everything goes up. In this case, we have commodities and energy.
Right.
But I'll go with your premise and say that we should do something, okay? So what do? We raise inflation, we raise interest rates. What does that do? That crushes our economic recovery. That crushes the people who are trying to work. The price of gas will go down. The price of commodities will come down. But overall, you don't want to raise interest rates. And if you're worried about our deficit in this situation, you raise interest rates. That makes bonds less attractive.
All right, I understand the argument. I understand the argument.
We'd have to raise our debt goes up.
But Mark, this argument presumes that central control of the economy is a better market mechanism than the free choices of free people. Why don't we have that in our system?
That's the important thing, is these record low rates are also distorting the banking system. Right now, banks could just load up on government debt, borrow from the Fed, and enjoy a 3% spread risk-free. They have no incentive. It's actually a false sort of belief that the banking system stopped lending. They just changed who they were lending to. Bank balance sheets actually increased because they kept buying more and more government debt and less business loans.
All right.
Now, if you believe that more government debt's productive for the economy, that's great. But if you actually think we're going to get out of this by growing business, then we're going the absolute wrong direction.
All right. More with Nancy Skinner and Mark
agree with
Calabria.
Mark on
We'll
that
get
point.
right back to you, Nancy, right after the break. Still with us, our syndicated radio talk show host Nancy Skinner and Mark Calabria, Director of Financial Regulation Studies at the Cato Institute. As promised, Nancy, to you first. I gather you heard the president earlier today. A, were you pleased with what he said? B, do you think he had to say that in order to avoid a mass exodus of his base on the left?
I was pleased, of course. That's not a surprise to you, Judge. But no, I don't think he says anything politically to appease either side, actually. I've known President Obama for a long time now. He's a pragmatist, though. And so what he said is, look, now that we got past this this year, we got to make big choices. And we have just begun talking about the major entitlements. And he is willing to make some changes in entitlements. But what he will not do is he will not, like Paul Ryan wants to, take Medicare and turn it into an $8,000 voucher for seniors while giving $1 trillion more in tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans. He's got to draw that line. And some programs he will cut that the left likes.
Mark, if anything raises my blood pressure, it's when people say give tax cuts. You know what? The money that we earn belongs to us.
Is our own.
It does not belong to the government to decide how much we should keep. Another philosophical debate for another time. Mark, to your expertise, what kind of sense does it make to raise taxes on anybody during a recession? I got 3 Democrats right here. Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Joe Lieberman of Connecticut, Ben Nelson of Nebraska, all 3 of whom said we will never raise taxes during a recession.
And that's exactly what you don't want to do. You don't want to raise taxes during a recession. I mean, that's actually Keynes 101. If you buy into the Keynesian framework, it says that raising taxes are contractionary. And in fact, many of the criticisms of Roosevelt was he tried to run a balanced budget during the 30s, which actually contracted the economy. So I would say you need to be worried about the long-term deficit. I agree with that. I don't think you want to raise taxes right now. I would not deal with the long-term deficit by raising taxes. I think it's important to keep in mind, though, that the Ryan plan actually talks about lowering and eliminating deductions to allow you to pay for the decrease in the rates. It's actually, the tax side of it is budget neutral. It's not a tax cut. And the president's own commission expressed the same thing. Let's get rid of the deductions.
Nancy, we have less than a minute left. I'll let you get the last word. What do you think happens? Where do you see this going? Do the Republicans pass Paul Ryan and it's dead on arrival in the Senate? Is the president's proposal to raise taxes dead on arrival in the House? Are we in for perpetual stalemate?
I think that he already extended those tax cuts to do that, just to make sure that there was no repercussions during this recession. But he won't go further. Those were to be sunset by Bush and the Republicans. They enacted that in case we had deficits. Well, we do. So he's not. That is the long-term deficit. We have to phase in these cuts so it doesn't kill our recovery now, and that's what he's doing. Let's keep the investment. And so I think the Republicans will pass that bill, and I think it's going to politically kill them, because when seniors find out that Medicare is going to be a voucher,
I appreciate it. Nancy Skinner, Mark Calabria, thank you for joining us. My final thoughts on all of this. Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? Can previous generations enact social welfare programs or build an empire around the world financed by borrowing and then enslave subsequent generations to pay for it in perpetuity? Or do individuals have a responsibility to pay their own way and take care of themselves? Tonight, Thomas Jefferson and the meaning of liberty. Today is the anniversary of Thomas Jefferson's birth. He is the American original who created the American Republic. He authored the most famous phrase in American history, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. His legacy of natural rights, that our liberties come from God and not from the government, lives on in the hearts and minds of freedom-loving people throughout all the world. But what would Jefferson think of us if he were alive today? He once remarked that it is incumbent on every generation to pay its own debts as it goes. Would he be proud of what we've become, or would he turn his back on a nation that squandered his legacy? Could he even have imagined our present debt? It was reported just yesterday that in the last 6 months, the debt of the federal government increased by 15%. That is an enormous sum in a very short period of time. And it highlights the dangerous and historic times in which we live as we shoulder an unprecedented $14.3 trillion debt burden. That is a sum that is so astronomical, it defies comparison. So let me try. If you laid out 1 trillion $1 bills end to end, they would stretch from the earth to the sun. If you did the same with dollar bills only going to the moon, they would go to the moon and back 300 times. 200 times. If you spent $1 a second, it would take you 32,000 years to spend $1 trillion. That's longer than all of recorded human history. Now multiply all this by 14, and you still need to add another $300 billion to visualize the government's debt. It is truly unimaginable in size. But the Congress lets the president borrow more than $1 trillion a year. It's ridiculous. It's unconscionable. It's immoral. And it's dangerous. And we don't have the money to pay it back. Only an informed and educated public, which is our goal here at Fox, can restore fiscal sanity. Like in Jefferson's days, these are the times that try men's and women's souls. The modern-day struggle for liberty is a renewed fight from a long-forgotten age. The founding of the American Republic was defined not simply by throwing off the yoke of the British Empire, for when the Revolution ended, the founders were left to argue and battle amongst one another to create a government on their own. Just like our politicians today, they became corrupted by too much power, and many of the founding fathers began to lust for more power and desired to shape the American Republic toward big government. But not Thomas Jefferson. With a few minor exceptions, the Jeffersonian band, the Anti-Federalists, who believed in small government and maximum individual liberty, struggled against the power-hungry big government types at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. The big government types, the Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, were dissatisfied with the Articles of Confederation that had held the states together loosely, but left them largely alone to govern their own affairs. Although the Federalists were victorious in drafting the Constitution with a stronger central government, the Anti-Federalists were successful in restraining the new central government with the Bill of Rights. But the fight to limit the power of the new federal government would go on, and Jefferson would continue to be at the vanguard of that fight. In 1798, he secretly authored the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. These declarations were a response to the Alien and Sedition Acts that the Congress had just enacted that criminalized free speech. The modern equivalent of the Alien and Sedition Acts, Woodrow Wilson's Espionage Act of 1917, is still the law today, and even as we speak is being used to silence the speech of those who embarrass the federal government. Would Jefferson be happy with the federal government today? Well, his arguments that the best government governs least, once long forgotten, have been revived through the Tea Parties and the assertion of the rights of the states to nullify federal action not authorized by the Constitution. Would our hero be happy on his birthday? Only if we continue our current push for the principles that he lived for. The grassroots are alive and thriving. Many more Americans than ever before now see that the emperor wears no clothes and the government only has the power that we give it. So what shall it be, America? Do we let big government continue to spend and regulate us into economic slavery? Or do we continue our push to breathe life into Jefferson's legacy? The choice is yours, and the choice is obvious. Tonight on Freedom Watch on the Fox Business Network at 8 p.m., Ohio Congressman Dennis the Menace Kucinich on why the president's war in Libya is wrong, illegal, and unconstitutional. From New York, defending freedom. So long, America.